Hi, welcome to another episode of Middleism Apologetics. I'm your host, Stephen Whitsitt, and I'm working with new software, as you can see already. Uh, Being apologetic, I want to deal more with interacting with things that we see and hear. And so I'm going to be able to incorporate the screenshots and all of that with this new software that I've gotten. And thank you, Roy Runyon, for being able to give me that. Appreciate it. And what we're going to be doing here in this episode is deal with Michael Miano's response to Aaron Tyler's Escape from Preterism interview. In other words, Aaron Tyler did an interview on a public radio and did a live stream on that in New York and arguing against, of course, full preterism and getting out and some of the things that he said there. Um, Michael, of course, could not escape having to deal with that because Michael was Aaron's mentor. In other words, Aaron got into full preterism because of Michael, and now he's come out. And so you can understand that there's going to be a little bitterness and animosity towards Aaron for his tack now on full preterism. And that's to be expected, but I don't think we need to go into the personal attacks, Michael. We're really not necessary. Now, that said, before we go in, there are two things I want to point out that need to be brought very clearly into scope and into view when we're dealing with arguments and using and citing scholars. The first one is we got to understand that there are liberal scholars and conservative. Liberal scholars did not accept the inspiration of the scriptures. They denied a lot of the supernatural events, very rationalistic and explaining this away. So they believed the Bible is just stories made by men where God was able to get his message across through there, versus the conservative says that this was the complete inspired word of God. So there is that basic difference there. The other difference that he needs to understand is that in these doctrines there are essentials and non-essentials. Essentials are what we find in the creeds, in the councils that they argued over to unify them, despite Michael's claims otherwise. And then there was the other doctrines that are considered non-essentials, such as sprinkling or immersion. How do you do baptism? Those things are not necessary to believe one way or the other in order to be saved. Speaking in tongues, you don't have to speak in tongues to be saved, and you can disagree with tongues and still be saved. Those are non-essentials. Essentials is you've got to agree that who Jesus was, his divine nature, that Jesus was fully God, fully man, who came, died, and rose again, and then ascended to the heaven 40 days later. Those are essential doctrines that you cannot change. So what Michael does is in his things, he brings out these church fathers and these quotes, one to try and show that they believe that in some sense that there was a second coming that happened in AD 70, that, somehow or another that was proven true. That they were not unified in their theology or in eschatology especially and things like that. And I'm going to be able to go through and show why that is simply not true. And how they made statements that seem to contradict some of their stances. And he wants to point those out. So let's go through some of these notes and look through things, and I will respond to them. So he says it was what he basically said about AD 7 is true, but this statement is right. However, Aaron clearly does not realize that within church history, many scholars have admitted portions of the statement, either the coming of the new heavens, the new earth, or the resurrection is prophesied by the prophets has indeed happened. So here's some links that you can review the evidence. Now, Aaron, as many full critics of full preterism often try to do, go about asserting the church fathers if they are united front in regards to many areas of theology, especially eschatology. Now, as far as concerning eschatology, the ante-Nicene fathers, the ones between 33 and 70, 325 AD, were very unified. They were very much Tillyism, Millerism, meaning they were very much premillennial with the united eschatology that they believed in, and then that of course changed over the years. But the idea is that they were pretty much unified in those points, and it wasn't separated until much later, until after. Um, Now, the statements that were made, let's look at them. I am shocked at the number of people who want to fashion their theology around church fathers, you know, and he puts in here baptism, regeneration, infant baptism, and other heretical teachings. Well, those are basically secondary issues, as I said before. They are not essential. You can believe in baptism and not believe in baptism. But yes, people are very dogmatic about those things being heresies, and we can agree that infant baptism is not taught in church. But if you believe that, that's not going to send somebody to hell. That does not mean you are not saved. It is when you change the nature of who Christ is that we fall into danger. His next quote here is, most of what the church fathers wrote remains untranslated. Well, so what? What do we have translated proves what they believed, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. He goes on to the next ones about what was fulfilled and what wasn't fulfilled. But let me bring up then here something that I want to look at, and I'll get to the essentials of that. These are part of my notes that will be put in there. Okay, here it is. Now, how do I prove that they were very unified in their doctrines and theology and very deliberate? Okay, people, here it is. This is very simple to understand. A creed is a statement of faith, something that the people believe in. Am I being funny on that point? Okay. Here's the Eusebius quote that I believe Michael brings up. He says, when then we see what was foretold for the nations fulfilled in our own day, and when the lamentations and wailing that was predicted of the Jews and the burning of the temple and its utter destruction can only be seen even now to have occurred according to the prediction, surely we must also agree that the King who was prophesied, the Christ of God, has come. Since the signs of his coming have been shown in each instance, I have treated to have been clearly fulfilled. Okay, I'm finding it kind of funny that, first of all, what was of old foretold for the nations fulfilled in our own day. And with lamentations and wailing that was predicted of the Jews for the burning of the temple and those things. Yes, they were, what, in 70 AD? I don't think Eusebius was talking about his day, of course, in 325. But according to the predictions of the temple and all that was being burnt down, yes, he agreed fully that those were that. Since the signs of his coming have been shown in each instance, I have treated to have been clearly fulfilled. So he believed, and he made the statement that the Olivet was fulfilled. He said it on several occasions, and all the prophecies of the Olivet were completely fulfilled. But yet, here's what we need to go into that Miano does not bring up. The Apostle Creeds, which circulated about 180, had two statements. Eschatology. He will come to judge the living and the dead, the resurrection of the body, and the life of everlasting. Two statements that were made in that. Very important. Council of Nicaea, 325. What else did it say? He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. And I look forward to the resurrection of the dead. Both these statements were included in these creeds. Now, what did Eusebius say concerning the things that they said about and came to understand in the Council of Nicaea, which he presided over? He wrote a letter back to his people, to his diocese, and to the other priests and things, and this is what he said. As we have received from the bishops who preceded us, and in our first catechisms, and when we received the Holy Laver, and as we have learned from the divine scriptures, and as we believed and taught in the presbytery and the episcopate itself, so believing also at the time present, we report to you our faith, and it is this. This is what we believe. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, the maker of all things, visible and invisible. And he goes on, and he declares that whole Nicea Creed, and he states that this is what we all believe. So how is it he can make a statement saying that the Olivet was fulfilled and that Jesus came, but yet still claiming to believe in the Nicene Creed that says that Christ will come in the future in a bodily resurrection. It's because when you look at Eusebius a little closer, he believes that the Olivet and the is prophesying a judgment to come upon that generation, not the second coming. And that's very clear. That's the distinction. It was a coming of Christ in judgment, and that is the language being used. So as they went on, of course, there was other doctrines that came up that they argued against, different ones that popped up that they had to argue against. For example, even in Irenaeus, who wrote 130, who was a 2nd century early church father. I think Michael inadvertently said 4th century in his video, but he was a 2nd century. He argued and wrote a whole book against heresies to argue against those heresies. In the following councils all the way through, they all talked about dogma, things that they believed, things that the church needed to believe, and there was a presentation. 2 doctrines that they were very clear about: incarnation and the Trinity. They started with the ante-Nicene fathers, those that wrote between 33, or well, I can say 70 to 325. All of those that came before 325 that wrote, all affirmed pretty much the same things, and it led into the doctrine of the incarnation and the Trinity being formulated, and started with 325 and went as late as 380, in affirming those essential teachings of those 2 doctrines. So, again, he points out another quote from Eusebius, father of church history. "I need only say that all these things have been done. The old and elementary systems passed away with the greater noise. All these predicted empires have fallen, and the new kingdom, the new heaven and earth, the new Jerusalem, all of which have descended from God to be formed by his power, have been realized on earth." And he's talking spiritually because he still believes in a future second coming. Literally. That is the only way to explain this, is he's talking about it spiritually. So let's respond to hear what Michael also says. Building a straw man and false character of something is often a method used when someone wants to go about decidedly attacking another view of perspective. Well, when he quotes the early church fathers and says they believed in it, and he implies that they believed in second coming, that's not true. That's building a false character of what somebody has said there. So that's, again, Michael is proven wrong in that point. Aaron is sought to build up the image of him being a full preterist and then escaping. He said preterist doesn't believe in spiritual warfare. Well, most preterists that I've talked to deny that there is Satan, that he has been bound, that there's no more demons, and even to the extreme that Satan never existed. He wasn't a real being, that he was just an anthropomorphic of man's fallen nature. All kinds of doctrines have come up about that. So, yes, I would agree with Aaron in saying that most of them do not believe in a spiritual warfare, that they believe the warfare that's going on is against not spiritual principalities, but people and put in high places and governments and things and such like that. But then Paul said what? "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness in high places." But see, that was all done away with, and Satan was bound in 70 AD. So therefore there is no more, in essence, spiritual warfare. Yeah, well, and he responded to Proverbs 13:12. "Delayed hope makes the heart sick, but fulfilled desire is a tree of life." You bet, the delayed hope. But we don't believe that the second coming has been delayed. It's not. It'll come at the right time in the right place. So yes, the heart is sick until we see that happen. We groan until we see that happen. And then when it happens, boy, that'll be great. Let's see. I'm trying to go through here. I don't want to deal with everything, of course. I dealt with the main 3 things. And Okay, again, I believe I made the point about the lack of clear and consistent eschatology in church history. That is not true. So further reforms, no matter what they show up in church, should be examined by Scripture, not argued by way of council, creeds, quotes, and confessions. Do we not remember the words of the beloved 15th century reformer Martin Luther? So now he's going to quote him, but we're not supposed to believe him in theology and what they said about eschatology. And I've just demonstrated in my notes, it'll be in there, about premillennial was the dominant view back then. And of course, the two main statements that come in the creed, those are essential to eschatology. Clear reason, okay, in what Luther said, okay, so that's kind of silly. Aaron stated that full Protestant does not have one true scholar, and that is true. Sam Frost was the only scholar that they really had at one point, but he is no longer in there, so what Aaron said was correct. You cannot find any preterist scholar who had a degree in preterism. They can get degrees on the other theologies and things like that. For example, William Bell has a degree, but it is in futurist eschatology from the school that he went to. They did not give him a degree in preterism. They gave him a degree based on his scholarship in other fields and other things, but not in preterism. The school that he went to did not teach preterism, so that's a fact. And then it's just been proven and documented that Don Preston received an honorary degree from the school, but now that the school has realized that Don teaches preterism and what he teaches about full preterism, that they wish they hadn't given it. That's documented. They would have never given it to him if they had vetted him better and known exactly what it was that he was teaching. Somebody recommended it on the board because of all of his writings, and so they gave him an honorary degree. And if they could take it back, they probably would. That's documented. Now, we get into bodily resurrection and that discussion there, and that is something that we will do as we are going to interact with his video on Romans 70 and 8. These last little things like here we want to go through. If resurrection is in the past, there's no place for us. This is not an allusion to I.O. If there is no resurrection, if resurrection is past, then we have no hope in the future, because our hope is in the redemption of the body. And that's the futurist theology that has been there from the beginning, that Michael obviously is not aware of. In a futurist and individual way, asserts that God will redeem his creation, which is the mortal body, yes, and creation itself. He cites passage, tries to clear it from with Sadducees, who deny the power of God. That's true. If you don't say there's no bodily resurrection in the future, then you're like the same as Sadducees. They were sad, you see, because they didn't believe in the resurrection. So there's a similarity. They go on to demonstrate confusion with the host regarding Philetus and Hymenaeus, who is what was Paul saying? Matthew 27. If they were claiming that the resurrection was past, let me just note, and you could look in the graves and see the bodies were still there, then what kind of resurrection were they claiming was past? They would have to be arguing for a spiritual resurrection. That's obvious. You can't look in the grave and say, oh, look, the bodies are there, and there's a resurrection that happened. Well, if you look at the bodies, and that's that. But of course, Don Preston and the others, argue about the timing, saying that it was all about the timing. They were both teaching the same type of resurrection, a spiritual one, but not about a time. The timing was the difference. That is kind of bogus. He brings in divergent doctrines such as hell, covenant creation, and Adam, and things like this. Yeah, things that all preterists really screw up on really bad. If we live in fulfillment and this world is getting worse and worse, instead of the church, that would be kind of silly. We're not in the age to come, that's obvious. We're still in the last days. Okay. So Aaron asked, what had changed in AD 70? Well, no matter what, he brings up R.C. Sproul, no matter what view of eschatology we embrace, we must take seriously the redemptive importance of Jerusalem's destruction in AD 70, which is true. Redemptive historical importance of Jerusalem, and that includes the fulfillment of Christ's prophecy of the ending of the temple and its destruction. That was fulfilled. Then what was fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, I will take away from them the voice of the joy. And he quotes Athanasius. Again, yes, we know that Jerusalem does no longer stand according to all these guys. They all believe the same thing. So he proves all the way across the board that they all believe that yep, all the way through there. See these? It is no exaggeration to say that the fall of Jerusalem is the most significant national event in the history of the world. He goes to bring on, of course, and it's all true, that they all believe that Jerusalem is destroyed according to all of it, but they also all believe in a future second coming. That is where he is not paying attention. That's what he's not being considerate about and honest about, is that they all believed in a second future coming. That was why the creed was established in 325 to affirm that Christ's second coming was still future. Despite these comments about Jerusalem being destroyed, they never believed the Olivet talked about a second coming, but a coming of judgment. That's where I'll leave part one. I'll let it go here. Not aware of the time. I need to probably check that next time. But you guys have a good night, and we will see you on the backside.